Hello, Dr. Mata. This is Kevin Evans. I'm decided to take the video approach this time for assignment 4 on the MFT 6102. In the assignment, you got to choose a video, and I opted to pick A Beautiful Mind to try and do this assignment on, starring Russell Crowe, who plays the character John Nash. The video itself, so I'm glad I picked it because it had some really good examples, some clear examples of mental illness that I can use to try and diagnose the character. The movie itself does do the diagnosis, and so it kind of gives it away a little bit. A character being diagnosed with schizophrenia. So I kind of had that as a starting point, but it certainly was helpful to kind of go through, what DSM-5, considers schizophrenia. What are the symptoms that you have to see, and how does it define it? For example, DSM-5 says there has to be five different symptoms, or there are up to there are 5 major symptoms of the disease before you can say that they have schizophrenia. One being delusions, another one being auditory, visual hallucinations, disorganized speech, and some grossly disorganized, catatonic behavior, and negative symptoms. In addition to that, in order to be able to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, these symptoms need to be kind of prevalent for at least 6 months, and 2 of them need to be strongly prevalent or active for at least a month before somebody could be diagnosed, according to DSM, with schizophrenia. In this particular movie, John Nash certainly demonstrated those different symptoms. In addition, it was pretty clear that that this was going on far longer than 6 months. It went on for years, as well as the actual, for one period of time having more than one symptom. So just kind of touching on those symptoms in the movie. So delusions, there was quite a few delusions that he had, specifically with the fact that he had a roommate that didn't really exist, or at least he thought he did. He thought he was operating as a government agent, doing secret agency work. He thought he was under attack at times, or that he was being followed or chased. A lot of paranoia. There was the niece that he thought they existed as well. Had relationships with people that never really existed. So there was a lot of delusion in that regard. That connects, kind of really segues into the other piece of this, which was the hallucinations, which in this case, so he had both auditory and visual hallucinations, and you can even make an argument, based on the movie and the way they described it, that they might have even had some tactile hallucinations where he actually felt his roommate. There were times when his roommate and him, I think his roommate put his arm around him at one point, maybe shook hands with William Parcher, the government agent. So there was definitely hallucinations, and that was a prevalent, and probably the most significant symptom that was prevalent throughout the movie. The third symptom of disorganized speech, that actually was going on throughout the entire movie, even from the beginning. It may have even been an issue prior to the schizophrenia kind of taking hold and really becoming symptomatic. But because, like I said, because it was around from the beginning of the movie, he would stutter. He would have a really difficult time having conversation. It would be disorganized, especially casual conversation. That would be the most. There was a conversation he tried to have with a girl where he really didn't even know how to have a conversation with a girl, and ultimately kind of crashed and burned. The grossly disorganized and the catatonic behavior. This was probably the symptom that was the least common in the movie. There were times when he was disheveled, especially his hair. He'd have a disheveled look with his hair, or maybe just wasn't dressed, very well, like untucked shirt, or kind of slob type of look. The catatonic behavior you saw a little bit later in the movie when he was on medication. he would kind of be sitting on the porch and kind of looking out, not really doing anything, not really having any true desire. I don't know. Just he was just there. There was one scene where he had a baby that was on his lap that was crying, and he just was staring off into space and was just not present at that particular time. The last symptom of negative symptoms that was prevalent. So the lack of desire. You didn't see a lot of that either until he was on the medication. That was certainly a big thing when he was on the medication, kind of like the catatonic behavior you saw. But he certainly withdrew himself and became more isolated, and that was when he was really becoming symptomatic. When his wife eventually got help, that was largely because he was separating himself, and he was falling further and further into his paranoia and his hallucinations and losing grip with reality. And then no, so anyways, he was definitely demonstrating those, but again, that was also one that wasn't as strong as some of the others. So the movie, like I said, I thought it did a really good job of trying to demonstrate schizophrenia in some real world settings. I'm sure it took some liberties. It is Hollywood, but it was interesting from that kind of looking at it a little more clinically versus just for leisure. I did some research looking into just what schizophrenia is, and so last week I was learning a little bit about it, so I kind of went back through some of the readings that we had last week, went and did some additional research and found a couple articles that were about schizophrenia that gave me some additional information that was really helpful. So just a couple of things that I think are really relevant or important. So schizophrenia, I was actually surprised that it was even this high, which is not high at all, but it suffers about 1% of the population, across the world, about 24 million people in the world, and it's not really subjective to culture. So every culture, has people that suffer from it about the same across the board, which I guess I'm surprised by that. I didn't expect to see that. I would have thought there would have been some deviation just based on different cultures that may have driven that type of behavior, that type of illness, but that doesn't seem to be the case by some of the studies I was reading. The other thing is there's not really a clear-cut answer or definition of how schizophrenia comes to be. So the etiology of it, there's not really one way. It's there is certainly some biological aspects to it. There's also some psychosocial aspects to it. One thing though, that's clear is males typically get it more than females. It usually sets in about late adolescence to early adulthood, and so that's usually I think age 25 is what I read was the kind of the peak time frame of when you see that coming up. And there's also some, I guess it's like a developmental and progressive illness where early developmental stages, there are some indications that there are, that leads to schizophrenia if they're exposed to certain aspects. Negative aspects, I think I'm thinking of like double binds and certain conflicts that come up in life, especially during developmental periods and when people are progressing. So the psychosocial aspects, so some contributors, social systems, people, the coping strategies of certain families and how it works. There are genetics that are related, from the biological perspective that I think make people more predispositioned to suffering from schizophrenia, and then some of the social factors. I think dealing with that can cause or flare up issues that may not otherwise have remained dormant. The nature of schizophrenia, there's kind of a reputation that it's a violent, that there are some violent aspects. And even if you look in the movie, there was a scene where during an episode, he didn't attack his wife, but he tried to protect his wife, but it came across as him trying to hurt her. Um, and there's this reputation that schizophrenic people are violent, and one of the studies I read was that that's not entirely true. It's actually, there is a higher rate of violence with schizophrenics, but it's actually partly because schizophrenics are more likely to be dealing with substance abuse, and the same rate of substance abuse is also the same rate as those with schizophrenics, and so there's a strong correlation between substance abuse and violence and schizophrenics and with substance abuse. So that is a part of it. Of course, they still do suffer more from violence, but it's not as extreme as maybe it's portrayed to be in movies and kind of folklore. The other thing is schizophrenic, because of the nature of how disruptive it is and how disabilitating the actual health issue is, it has a really significant impact within the actual system itself. So obviously, as an individual, a person suffering from it is gonna, they're gonna probably suffer from depression. They may have anxiety disorders, and on top of that, like I mentioned already, substance abuse. They're probably, unless they're getting treated, probably going to have a hard time maintaining employment. There's a possibility of lack of desire or motivation really to do anything. So there's a lot of things obviously with the individual, but the system is going to be significantly impacted as well. So his family, if he's married, there's he's going to be pulling away from. So there's going to be isolation. He's going to be different. He's going to be different. He's going to be changing. He's going to be less responsive, which means that the family itself is going to have to change or modify to kind of cope with whatever's going on. There's going to be a lot more conflict. Family, there may be a lot of loss of trust because you just can't trust a person that doesn't really know what's true, what's not. Loss of functioning. So somebody, he or she is not going to be able to, I guess, keep in reference to John. So John wasn't able to help much right around the house. So there was a huge significant impact within the family where he even had a hard time taking the garbage out. It just has a major impact on the functioning of that role that person plays in the family. Can't help with children, can't help with really anything. So there's a lot of loss of trust, a lot of loss of help, support, and really actually just means you're doing that the system is doing a lot more to support John than ever before. So it's major. It has a lot of impact. As far as, so for me, narrative therapy is what I like the most, is from my previous classes as I've been learning about the different types of therapy. I really like the social constructionism idea, and I struggled actually initially when I was trying to think of a treatment plan. Like how do I actually do a treatment plan when my foundation is of a narrative therapy would be based on the idea that everybody has a reality, and that my reality's different than the client's reality, which and then if this case we're dealing with somebody that clearly has a reality that is dealing with things that just are real. So how do you deal with that? And I initially struggled with it, but then as I was going through Gerhardt, Diane Gerhardt's book from the classes, and just reminding myself of some of the principles of postmodernism and narrative therapy, I remembered that as part of narrative therapy, the goal is to co-create a new reality. And actually, as I thought about that made a lot of sense to me. Co-creating something that would really, that would work, I think, within this situation, because that's really what you have to do. You have to create a new reality for this person, because whoever, in this case, John, he has a reality that is just not compatible with living, and he really needs to make a new change. And so becoming a co-author with them, and I like the idea of being a co-author versus actually telling them what the reality is. You're helping that person know what's true, but they're also having an ownership in that. So I think that's actually probably something that could really work and can be really beneficial. So within the treatment plan itself, I opted to go with a narrative therapy approach. And so if I'm giving John treatment, I think one of the first things I really want to do as a therapist in this particular situation with anyone dealing with a kind of serious mental disorder, but especially with schizophrenic, I think would probably have as little trust in somebody as that's new to them as possible. And so I really want to try and establish a strong therapeutic alliance with not just with him, but also with the family, because the family needs to be a part of this. It's certainly the treatment plan, I think, needs to be a biopsychosocial approach. Medication is certainly going to be a key part of that. So when I'm going through and I'm doing my my initial assessments, when I want to meet with the whole family, I want to understand not just the impact of what's going on with John, but I also want to know what's going on with his wife, what's going on with his child. I want to know how they're being impacted. And initially, I really want to make sure that I'm optimistic and that I'm showing that there's hope, because I imagine anyone in that situation is probably feeling hopeless, feeling like there's just nothing that they can do, and what's the point of kind of doing this, because it's got to feel hopeless. So I want to be hopeful, and I want to be optimistic. That's one of the first things I want to do within that treatment plan. Then, as I'm doing an assessment, I want to look at from a narrative therapist perspective, I want to be looking at some of the larger social or classes issues or societal issues. And really, with somebody with schizophrenia, in this case with John, I don't know if there's a lot of class issues or socials. There could be. One of the thoughts that came to mind was certainly the stigma of schizophrenia and mental illness, especially in the time that this is happening, where I think people are less educated on what's going on and what illness really exists and what it means. So I want to be looking at how those impact and how we can incorporate that into the therapy. And I also, and this is kind of one of the interventions that I'll eventually would get to, but I want to start, creating the family, getting them united on a common objective. But specifically, when I'm starting to create the goals, so we're going to look at goals of trying to reduce some of the conflict that's going on at home, but also trying to reduce some of the symptomatic behavior that's going on with John, which is where, figuring out what kind of assessment we need to do, what kind of medication he needs to get on. Certainly need to refer him over to a psychiatrist to make sure that he's getting some sort of antipsychotics that will be able to help alleviate some of the symptoms. I think some of the things I read is it takes 7 to 14 days after somebody's on antipsychotics to reduce or I guess eliminate one of the, I guess significantly reduce, if not eliminate, the symptoms that are going on. At least the 4 of the 5 symptoms, negative symptoms that apparently aren't impacted by the antipsychotics, but everything else is. So that's one of the first things we need to do is get him on that. And then John should, after being on the medication, hopefully is a little more responsive to actual therapy itself, and ways to try and improve the situation from a systems perspective as well in the family. So like I said, so some of the goals I'm going to be looking at is just how do we reduce some of the conflict that's going on at home. How do we reduce and create not making John as a target, but really looking at this as a system issue, and how do we improve just the system itself, making sure that everybody is kind of participating in that, including their child. Some of the interventions that I specifically would be targeting, there's actually 2. One is mapping the influence. I think that's a really important one when especially when John is out of the symptomatic stage, when you can really talk to him as a person and help them see the significance of what's really going on and what is the actual impact that's happening downstream from some of the issues that are going on with him. And then And vice versa with the wife and the child, and helping them, what is their behavior contributing to or helping or hurting the situation, and mapping the influence of their decisions downstream. The other intervention that I would do for sure, and I'm blanking on it right now, so let me look at my notes. I'd want to make sure that we're not targeting John, but we're targeting the problems, and using externalizing questions to separate the problem from the person, so that it's not John that's the problem, it's schizophrenia, and it's a target that everybody can attack, and not an individual, where hopefully you can maintain some semblance or happiness or motivation, and not feel like it's personal attacks that's on John itself. And then working through those things. I expect this is a lifelong problem, so it's going to take a long time. But certainly, trying to reduce, again, the main thing is trying to reduce the symptoms, trying to reduce some of the conflict, and find a balance within that family. I want to make sure I touched on all the issues that I wanted to touch on. And I think that's it. So, anyways, I feel like the narrative therapy approach could work, and I think whether it's the best approach, I don't know, but I think it would be something. Like I said, that's what I like, and that's what I want to start with, at least. And so I'm hopeful that that can be a good way to help with the situation. So I appreciate your time, Dr. Mata, and look forward to your feedback. Thanks.